Well, thank you for having me. It's actually quite humbling to be here in front of you, and I actually never imagined myself to be in this room. I expected to be one of the smaller rooms downstairs, so thank you again for this opportunity. So today's topic is nimble communication, and I know not everyone's familiar with the word nimble. The way I interpret nimble is being quick and resourceful. Actually being flexible with your communication, because you will have moments when you have a lot of either innovations or services that you're providing or events that are coming up, and it's very exciting times, and then you have gaps. And sometimes these gaps, you're wondering, what do I do? What's next? What do I communicate? What kind of content do I communicate? And the worst time to have a gap is when you have a natural disaster, because then you have to prove to the people, what am I worth? Why am I here? So I'll go ahead and start with what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the basics of communication, which is what is a mission statement and your value proposition, but also understanding who are your stakeholders. We have different stakeholders that we need to take into account, and some of them will require more attention than others, or will require different content that you need to communicate with them. And then capitalizing on your competencies. That would be probably the first 8-9 minutes, and then I'll go ahead and talk about how to be nimble, and I'll go into more of a case study, Houston, my city, and I'll probably take the last remainder of the 10 minutes. And then finally I'll cap off with the benefits of being nimble, of being flexible, being resourceful and quick. So before we go into nimble communication, I think it's important to know the distinction between your mission statement and your value proposition. A lot of organizations sort of confuse the two and say, or this is our mission, this is what we do, and base off the entire communication strategy based on the mission and say, it's our reputation. And it's not. Your value proposition is a lot more. The mission statement can be sometimes very lofty ideals versus your value proposition is actually the tangible assets, what you can actually provide. So for an organization outside CERN, for example, a private organization, they could say we want to provide the best service to the clientele. But the value proposition, we want to go ahead and cut waste by 40% and make your lawn look nice or make your house look beautiful. That could be a private organization. For NASA, it's a similar. I'm from Houston, so NASA has always been a very prominent figure in my life. Their mission is really to accelerate the technology for space exploration, or creating technologies for space exploration. Again, a very lofty idea, but their value proposition is actually cost-effective technology for space flight. So they actually know, they have the know-how, they have the capability to not only engage in space flight or space exploration, but also know how to make it cost-effective. That's what they're really good at. CERN has several. They have a mission statement with 4 columns based on collaboration, technology, education, and research. And I think whoever you talk to as a stakeholder, your value proposition might be changing. It would be more about technology, and if you're talking about collaboration, more about the people. And every organization is different. What you need to remember, though, with your value proposition is that this is how you're selling yourself to your stakeholders. This is how you sell yourself to a government entity, a government organization, or how you sell yourself to clients or potential members of your community, employees as well. I am a consultant, so I work with different organizations in the Houston area. Most of them are commissions that work with the city of Houston. The city of Houston and the county are 2 government agencies, and they can't handle everything, so they created different organizations, commissions that work in sports. I work with 2 of them, and I just added a new client, which is the Red Cross, that I'm working with right now. But I work with a lot of these organizations, and sometimes they don't have the capability, so I come in and help them with their issues, with communication issues that they have. One other basic that I think it's really important to discuss is understanding your stakeholders. I know that we talk about stakeholders as, these are the people who are your audience, right? These are the people who have some kind of interest that can benefit from your organization. And we usually look at demographics. We look at, how old they are, what kind of education they have, what was it to them to be associated with an organization. I would go ahead and say that it's even further than that. It's also stakeholder investment. And by investment, I'm not talking about money. It's not money. We're not talking about shareholders either. We're talking about stakeholder investment. And that means how much time the stakeholder is putting into learning more about you and how much time you're putting into that stakeholder. It's that time investment. And how educated are they about your organization? I think we often look at stakeholders and say, stakeholders are all important. We need to communicate to them all equally. And I think that's sometimes a little bit myopic, because you have some stakeholders that are really interested and they deserve more of your attention. And there's some stakeholders who are saying, no, we're not really interested. And sometimes you're wasting your time and your efforts. And of course, you want to work with the stakeholders who aren't interested and trying to convert them to become interested in your organization. So it's about investment, how much investment they have in you and how much you want to invest in them to reciprocate that kind of relationship. And before I move on to the next slide, there's this thought that I had, and it's you're not only as relevant as your next innovation. I know that when we look at companies and the products, we often think about like Apple and iPhones. Oh, this is going to revolutionize the tech community. This is going to revolutionize the medical community. This is going to revolutionize the scientific community. And sometimes that can also be a little bit myopic. We're only thinking about that community. In order to get that innovation, that technology, or even that service that you're providing, you're developing all these different capabilities that can actually benefit other groups of people. So when you're thinking about your innovation, you're not just important because of that one innovation. You have to think about outside. How am I important in other areas? And I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. And that's honing in to your competencies. When you have a product or service or an innovation, you're working with different components that put a lot of effort into that. And you're working with people, and people could be a diverse community that you have. I'm not talking about nationalities. I know that here at CERN we look at the diversity of people coming from different parts of Europe, or even around the world. It's more than that. It's also the diversity of your disciplines. We have people who are in IT, who are in communication, who are in business, physics, medical, and they all have their own input, and they can also contribute to your projects. So it's a diversity of the disciplines that come in that add to your value proposition. Know-how and expertise, it's your expertise, it's your interest. I know organizations that they focus on accelerators, getting companies, getting startups to get the funding that they need, but they also have people in that organization that know how to code. And that's great expertise. At CERN, one thing I was just telling Anna as well was that I've always been impressed of how many non-native speakers are incredibly gifted writing English and speaking English. It puts a lot of native speakers to shame. And that's good, because that's one of your competency here. You have people who master the English language, and with English language you can go ahead and communicate to a broader audience. And that's great expertise, that's great interest that you have here. Around the innovation, you also have assets, technology, facilities, buildings, equipment that another organization might not have, but somehow it adds and contributes to your value-adding scheme. And I'll talk about this with one example that I have. Think about washing machine. I know it means nothing right now, a washing machine, but I'll come back to the idea of a washing machine, because it's something that we often overlook. It's not important, but you find yourself in another area in a different time and say, we're so happy to have a washing machine on board. I'll talk to you about this later. And then the last component that I want to talk about is community engagement. When you have a team that works with education, works to create opportunities for people who would not have the opportunity to understand your product, to learn how to master coding, for example, to be exposed to different fields that they wouldn't normally be exposed to. That in itself is it's a value-adding component to your product. And if you know how to take advantage of that, you'll be ahead of the game when it comes to communication. So this is where I start talking about Houston. I'm very proud of where I'm from. I'm from Houston, Texas. I know that when you think about Houston, you probably think about NASA, you think about cowboys, and you probably think about old industry, old manufacturing. Houston actually is the 4th largest city in America. It's about to become the 3rd largest city in America in 10 years. So our population is growing. 1 out of every 4 individuals is actually born abroad. So out of 4 people you're talking about, they're not native. So you're talking about a very diverse international group of people. I know at CERN we're running always into people that are from different nationalities, but when you think about your own city, your own town, how many people do you know that are actually from abroad? And that's a smaller number. In Texas, in Houston at least, 1 out of every 4 is from abroad. We're the most ethnically diverse city in America. I'm not just saying this. New York City, the New York Times, and the LA Times have both written about how Houston is the most ethnically diverse city in America. So we're not just very proud of our city. This is something that America is looking into as well. And we actually have no ethnic majority in Houston. Something that when we came to CERN, everyone looked at me and said, "Oh, you're American. You're being introduced to all these cultures." And I said, "Well, actually, I was already introduced because I came from Houston." But one of the things that Houston also has to offer is the industries. We have the largest medical center in the world. That's where we have a lot of the life sciences innovations. We have energy, the oil and gas companies there. I think that we have at least 30 headquarters for oil and gas companies in Houston. And then, of course, aerospace and aeronautics, and that's where NASA comes in. NASA is at the helm. We have all these companies. So those are major industries and manufacturing. I've added sports. Sports is not really much of an industry, but that's a commission that I work on. And we've been working really hard to create a new branding for the city, as Houston is a sports city. We have 4 national teams, and so we're very proud. And so sports is what I'm adding. It's another industry to Houston. So I'm very proud to have this client, Harris County Houston Sports Authority. Their mission is really to bring world-class events to Houston. In essence, is to make Houston a sports tourism city, a sports tourism destination. Their mission is very lofty ideal for economic development to people through sports. Their value really is that they own the debt to all the stadiums. We have 5 stadiums in Houston, and it's the responsibility of Harris County Houston Sports Authority to make sure that those stadiums are being used. And so last year, one of our greatest achievements was to get Manchester United against Manchester City to come to Houston. And of course, we had many soccer fans, British soccer fans or international soccer fans come to Houston and say, "Wow, Houston offers a lot more than manufacturing and oil and gas and life sciences." But Harris County Houston Sports Authority, my organization, like many other organizations, learned that there are other things that they can offer to the community, especially when something happens, something catastrophic happens. And that's when the third 500-year storm hit us. Hurricane Harvey was a Category 4 hurricane. It hit Corpus Christi. It didn't hit Houston directly. There were no winds in Houston. But when you look at a hurricane, by the way, I'm not a weatherman, so don't check my science on weather forecasting. But when you have a hurricane, it will spin off tornadoes. And we had tornadoes around the Houston area that caused some damage. But we also had a lot of flooding. And this was the third time that we had catastrophic flooding in Houston in 2 years. It's a problem that our organizations are facing. It's a problem that the community is learning how to deal with. And sometimes we don't even have time to deal with or to learn through them because we're trying to go back to normal. There are a lot of families in Houston that don't have their homes completed. Their walls are gutted down. That means when you have flooding, you have to throw away half your wall because it can grow mold. And so it becomes a toxic environment. And so this is, when you're dealing with such a catastrophic event, a lot of organizations from big corporations to small mom and pop stores have to learn how do we communicate our value proposition and what do we do different to stay relevant. Because obviously during a catastrophic event, you can't really fulfill your mission. You can't really fulfill your value proposition. You can't offer what you're famous for offering. And you can't rely on your reputation either. Because the population might not know who you are, and that becomes an opportunity, or they think that you provide other services when you don't. And that was the case for the Red Cross, actually. A lot of people were expecting the Red Cross to do a lot more activities, and it's not really their forte. But this is where we start learning how to be nimble. So this is Houston. We had 51 inches of rain. Flooded the entire city. I think we had a lot of islands. I was not flooded, but 2 miles down, many people lost their homes. 51 inches, that's around 129 centimeters of rain that hit Houston in 3 days. And there was so much water that we didn't know what to do. The city doesn't have a good plan to mitigate with the water. The county and police and other officials had to figure out ways to open levees, open dams, and sometimes that meant more flooding into other neighborhoods. But it was just to release the pressure that we had. So you can imagine during this time, the city shuts down. This is the third time it shuts down in 2 years. So it's, I wouldn't say that people are used to it. They're not. You're never used to something like this. It affects people differently. And not the same area floods twice. So sometimes you flood once and the next time you don't and the next time you do. So it was a very difficult time for everyone there. We had enough water to run for 15 days, to run Niagara Falls for 15 days, if you can imagine that. And when you compare Hurricane Harvey with other hurricanes, like Hurricane Katrina, which is probably the most famous hurricane in American history, in modern American history, we had more water falling on us than there was at Hurricane Katrina. However, truth be told, there were less mortality rate than Katrina, and that's because we mitigated and we're worked around. We created a different communication plan, and we learned how to actually be resourceful and understand what's important to our community. We opened 2 different shelters, 2 different conventions. George R. Brown Convention Center is the one you see up there. We had around 10,000 people in those shelters, and they were coming and going. So when someone comes to the shelter, we don't want them to stay forever. We want them to be comfortable. So we have teams that will go ahead and help them find a home so they can go back to normal, because they have children, they have jobs, they want to go back to normalcy, they want to start working because they have damage. They didn't want to wait and just wait. They want to get back on their feet. So we had people coming and going, but we had around 10,000 people, and then we opened another shelter at a different convention center, and this shelter we also had 10,000 people. I think there were actually 30,000 people that were put in shelters at one point. There are 30,000 people put in shelters. This entire region that you see in red are all the counties that were affected by Hurricane Harvey. That is pretty much the entire coastline of Texas. That's all oil and gas, all aeronautics, and Houston being the only place where you have life sciences. So all these industries were affected by that. There's still like 90,000 people that are still waiting on insurance to help them out for support with the hurricane. When we opened the first shelter, and I say we as Houston, my office, Harris County Houston Sports Authority, we have an office right next to the shelter, and so the mayor asked us if we could help. And we thought, well, one of our things that we do have is we have facilities, we have water because we are in sports. So the one thing that we can do is push out the water to the people, to the public, so that they can be comfortable, right? We got the kennels, we have a ID machine, so that's where we started using our utilities. And we as a sports marketing or sports tourism office, we couldn't promote Houston at this time to come to Houston and watch sports, watch sporting events. But we know that we still have our stakeholders, and that's our community. Our community supports our office by coming to these events, and so it was the time for that. We can say, this is how we give back, this is how we communicate to you. So we were able to push water. We also have a network, right? We can leverage our networks, and so I know someone that actually called IKEA and said if they could donate bags, the blue bags from IKEA. So IKEA donated thousands of bags to each of these shelters, and that when people came in, they came in with whatever personal belongings they had, and then they got a bag, and so then they could actually carry their things. And it makes a world of a difference, because if you're a mom or a dad with kids, you can leave your kids in one place with the toys and whatnot, and then you can go to the next side or the next office or the next room and apply for assistance, apply for support from the government. And not having a bag really causes a problem. So we were able to leverage our relationship with our networks, with a lot of our partners, and see how they could help us in a completely different situation, which was during a natural disaster. So I think one thing that I really want to stress is during a natural disaster, you have to mitigate your communication, and that's you just shift focus. You focus on internal and external communication. Internally, you look into how are your employees doing, how are they faring. Obviously, you don't want to put them at risk. When you're getting a message from the government saying speak with officials first, so you obviously don't want them to come in and help out if they're going to be put in danger. You want to assess if they're doing well. And obviously, external communication saying, this is what we're doing as an office for the city. Now, there's something I noticed during this event, and that was reactive communication, and that's when you're reacting to an event, and who wouldn't react? Everyone would react a different way. But I noticed that organizations that were proactive actually dealt with these issues a lot differently, and actually had a more successful rate of communicating their value to the community. It's better to be proactive. And by that, it goes on to the next line of being people-centered or product-centered. Some organizations focus only on their products, only on their technology, and at that time, no one cares. Your house is flooded. You only care about what's happening to you and how do you get yourself out of that situation. And so the organizations that focus on people were the organizations that still have good esteem from their stakeholders, from the community. And that's, again, I noticed some organizations being reactive and talking to their stakeholders, and it was a little bit too late, versus the organizations that were proactive and speaking with their stakeholders. They were able to keep them as clients, or they were able to keep them as partners and say, okay, we're part of a community, we're all in this together. It's really hard if you're reactive and you're product oriented and you're saying, by the way, I have this new great product, I need funding for this. By the way, are you okay? It's too late. You want to be, obviously you want to be proactive and you want to be people centered. And during this time when you're mitigating the crisis, it's a great time to sort of capitalize on your competencies. What are you good at? What can you do? What can you leverage? And that's when, for example, I was talking about leveraging your network, talking with your network, seeing what partnerships you can create, what you can do to help your organization or help the community. And that comes into play because once you start learning that, you develop a new set of skills, and that you can always spin it to create a new PR. So when you have people that are going out into the shelters, working out there, who are normally working in sports events or sports management, they're now working with people. They're developing new skills. You can say, well, Harris County Houston Sports Authority, for example, has gained these skills. We're good at this. We can try to restore normalcy to a certain degree. We can also create opportunities in face of donor fatigue. Not sure if you're familiar with the idea of donor fatigue. Donor fatigue is when people are just so tired of donating. So we had Hurricane Harvey hit us, and then came Hurricane Irma, and that hit Florida. And then came Hurricane Maria that hit the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. And at some point, everyone says, no, I can't donate, I'm done, I'm too tired. I don't want to think about the hurricanes, I just want to think about restoring myself and my home back to normalcy. And so you have to work on donor fatigue. And sometimes, as an organization, you have to think about how am I going to achieve my results? How can I go ahead and communicate my value proposition? How can I fulfill my mission when people are saying, I don't want to participate anymore. I just want to stay within myself. And so I saw this with a lot of museums who their mission is obviously to educate people. The people don't want to be educated during a natural disaster. They want to be at home. And so what the museum did is they actually lowered ticket prices to make it more accessible, create more opportunities. They went into the communities that were really hit hard, the hardest hits, and said, we're bringing scientists to come in and show the experience with the children, because they can't come to the museum because the car got flooded. The parents have to work now another job just to make money, make more money to pay for the repairs. Someone else is in a different area because during a displacement or natural disasters, some families were separated. Some went to Dallas, or some went to San Antonio to work, or even to get their family back together. So you create these new opportunities, and that's really important, because when you're working on a special project, you're not thinking about this. When you're mitigating through a crisis, you realize that you have other competencies that you can focus on. And of course, when you're working through this, after one storm, two storms, three storms that we had in Houston, and of course, more storms coming into the rest of the country, you develop know-how, you develop some skills. And we knew, for example, as an organization, that when you open a shelter, you need to have some sort of security, you need to have some sort of a board or a panel of people that work specific areas at a shelter. And so with that know-how, we decided to go to Florida. So we were 24 hours away from Hurricane Irma hitting Florida. My office said, let's take a truck with a lot of supplies, with water, kennels, leashes for people who have dogs, because a lot of people will not go into a shelter if they don't have a leash or a kennel to put their dogs in. So let's take that supplies, let's take cleaning supplies, let's take some clothing, and take it to a city in Jacksonville, Florida. We did this. We knew that it was going to be a rough mission. We traveled 2 days to get to Florida. I think we actually arrived the day the storm stopped. It was the very first day when they're opening doors again, see what was happening. And we were able to call on our network the other sports commission locally and call some other very famous celebrities. In this case, we had Leonard Fournette, which is a running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars football team. And so together with him, a celebrity, and then the National Guard and the Marine Corps, we were able to go to some of the shelters and provide assistance, provide water, and help and talk to some of these people that were affected and say, we as Houston, as a city, we've been affected too. We understand what you're going through. This is probably the best practices that we learned, and this is how you can apply it too. Now, when you're doing all this, when you're being, again, nimble communication, this is a really great opportunity. Even in disaster, you find opportunities, because then you can leverage your network and also create good PR about yourself. This is something that you wouldn't normally do, but then you get to show to your stakeholders, to your community, and to other communities abroad that you have something that you can provide, and that's a lot of worth. You can provide a lot of value. And so this is one of our TV channel, Mark Berman. He's our sports commentator, and then it went on the national news as well that our office went to Florida to help them out, because we knew what was going on. We knew what to expect. And that's know-how. That's the knowledge of things go wrong, and sometimes they go horribly wrong. And even if you're trying to help, things will still go wrong. So by knowing that, we were able to share that with the team over there in Florida. Let me share some other examples in Houston. There's some other organizations that have completely different missions, right? Different value propositions. Station Houston is an accelerator organization in Houston. They help startups get the funding they need. During the storm, they really couldn't do that. Obviously, no one can do that during the storm, but they had a lot of coders sitting. And so all these people sitting in the room said, what can we do when the streets are shut down? We can't go out. We can't do anything. And so they developed this website where people could access it. Anyone that had a phone could access this website. It was shared through social media. Social media was a very powerful tool during the storm. And they could say, help, I'm stranded. I can't call the emergency number because they can't come to me. Can someone send a boat to pick me up? Or someone else could go and say, we're at a church. We run out of food. Can someone come and deliver food? And so the Station Houston, which is known for being an accelerator program, was actually able to use their core competency and get their coders to develop this site. This website and this know-how was actually replicated and used in Florida. So Florida actually used the same technology we had. And it wasn't created. This didn't exist. There wasn't a website where you can go and say, I need to request help. Our sports team, those are the people that we work with a lot. We had our celebrities come in full force. I know earlier I talked about having people who, diversity and having people who are advocates for you. J.J. Watt is our most famous athlete, and he went online and he actually was able to raise $37 million for the city of Houston. Obviously, he was probably the face of Houston during that time, and that helped get more attention to Houston. It didn't happen with Hurricane Irma. With Hurricane Maria, we had a lot of celebrities from Puerto Rico work on that. But you can see that there's a difference between Houston and Jacksonville. When you have people who are in love with their city or they're advocates, right, they will go ahead and evangelize. They will go ahead and promote and say, we need help, or this is what we can do. Can you help us too? And we'll provide a service back to you. Community engagement. The city of Houston was hit hard by Hurricane Harvey. A lot of their employees couldn't go to work because they were flooded. City Hall was flooded. And so this is actually a good friend of mine, Danae LaFleur. She invited me. I was with her on that trip. We invited the consular corps. These are all the consuls from all the different consulates. And we said, come to one of the shelters and we'll take you so that you can meet some of your citizens. So we had the Saudi consul general. We had the Pakistani consul general. We had a consul general for almost every single country, Germany, France. Italy wasn't there that night, that day. But we worked through all the different communities, and we showed them what the city was doing, what FEMA, which is the federal agency that mitigates natural disasters, the Red Cross is doing. And so that way, when they're talking with their communities and people who are seeking help, who are stuck there, who have visa problems, or they just find themselves that they need to speak with someone from their own delegation, they know what's going on. And so Danae, for example, her house was flooded. I remember coming into that room, and this guy gave me the VIP treatment to come in, and I asked him, how are you doing? He said, I lost everything. I'm staying in my mom's house. But this is a dedication about the people. You have people who are passionate about your organization, and they're willing to go ahead and say, okay, my job is really to work on this certain area, but I'll go ahead and help out here. And Danae with the protocol office is working there with the consular corps. This is where I was talking about the washing machine. Remember I mentioned about the washing machine? I'm sure CERN has lots of washing machines. No one really thinks about them. They're not really what you're famous for, right? Well, I went to Alief Independent School District. This is sort of like the commission for schools in my area. And they have many washing machines because that's where they wash their football equipment, their cleaning equipment. but it was sitting there doing nothing. I heard that the policemen were not able to go home 3 days straight, 4 days straight. Their replacements couldn't come in because their house were flooded or the streets were flooded. So their replacements couldn't come in to relieve them from their duty. So they were stuck 3 days in the same clothing, working day in, day out. So I called the school district, and after this happened, many other school districts started doing the same, and they started inviting the policemen to come over, wash their clothing, so that they can go back to work. And it's just about making the community a little bit more comfortable, having a little bit more dignity, right? Facilities as well, having the space that you can have to move food so that vans can come in and pick the food up and deliver to areas that were hit hard. So all these were really great PR activities that you can do, but this focus on whether you engage with the community, your assets you have, your facilities, your technology. I mean, you never think about washing machine as important technology, but it can be during a natural disaster, right? You have the people who will evangelize. They will go ahead and put the face and represent you. And these are the people that will bring the attention to you, and in a good way, right? So these are some other examples that I had. I know that Geneva probably will not have a hurricane in the next 10 years. You're not going to be affected. Again, I'm not a weather forecaster, so maybe you shouldn't believe me. But the probability of you having natural disasters are smaller here, I know. But you shouldn't wait to have a natural disaster. And I guess that's another message that I want to convey here. It's that you should mitigate the gaps you have between what you normally do, your core competency, your value proposition. And when you have that space between where you're saying, what do I do now? You can follow up and capitalize on what you're also good at. And that could be on your research side, your technology side, the diversity, the work that goes on with the people, and focus on that to leverage new opportunities, right? One important idea is don't idle. Idle means, staying still, not doing anything. Like when you're in a car, you're idling. Don't idle. You need to be constantly spinning. You need to be constantly thinking about content. What can you do? It can sometimes look like operations side, working to get something done, but it's also you're creating content, right? You're creating opportunities that you can use in your PR. Another important set is forecasting, or knowing what's going on in your community, doing it like an audit, seeing what people are hearing about you, what they think about you. In the U.S., this is becoming more and more important just because we hear it all the time that a certain agency is going to have their funds cut because the president doesn't like it anymore, or there's a tweet, and so everyone says, "Oh, don't believe this." My newest client, Red Cross, for example, they had some politicians saying the Red Cross doesn't do anything, and so that's really bad. And so for them, they have to audit and say, what's being spun? What are the people listening? What are they hearing? What are they being exposed to? They could be lies, but then this is your opportunity to say, no. This is our mission, and this is what our value proposition is. But we can also spin these core competencies and show you that we actually have a lot more to offer to you. Let's see, and finally, have a crisis management plan. You never know when that's going to happen. Again, natural disaster for Geneva might be different. I remember a few years ago when Geneva froze incredibly, and downtown was a mess. That was my first week at CERN, and I remember leaving because I was living in Freeburg, leaving Freeburg at 5:30 a.m. and I wouldn't get to work until 10:30, almost 11. So it was the longest journey because of that horrible winter that was happening that year. But you always need to have a crisis management plan. And by that, it's not just how do you react to the meeting, but also having the contacts. You have the contacts ready. You have an awesome directory where you have the contacts for each department. You know who to contact. But what happens if the internet goes down, if the power goes out? What is your plan next? So that's what I mean is having some kind of crisis management plan ready. A lot of my organizations in Houston don't have that. After this storm, I think they're thinking about it now. And a lot of, like I said, corporations to small stores owned by moms and pops, we call them mom and pop shops, they're learning that they need to have a crisis management plan as well. So what are the benefits of being nimble or being flexible, being resourceful during a time of crisis? Well, you're able to prioritize the messages that support your mission, right? You can't necessarily, during a crisis or when you have a gap, provide service that you want to always provide, but you can prioritize and say what supports our mission, what supports our value. You can also address issues and challenges as they come. A natural disaster is very unique because no two natural disasters are alike. They're very different. You might be affected or your community might be affected. It's not always the same, but you're able to go ahead and say, meet challenges, and that's what's really important about being flexible. You want to always remain relevant to your community. When you have gaps, again, or during natural disaster, you can't provide the service, right? So you need to find a way that you can still be relevant. How do you prove to the people, to your community, that you're still have value to them, even if you don't have the next big breakthrough, right? And once you're able to communicate to that and show them that you have other things that you can promote or other things that are of value, you're in a larger audience, and when you're in larger stakeholders, it sort of comes in a chain where you start inspiring people and saying, wait a minute, this organization has a lot more to offer. My organization, the Harris County Houston Sports Authority, they're all just about sports tourism, managing the bond debt, managing the money. Now they can say, we also manage, or we through sport, we can actually help our community as well. And in the future, when there's a question of how much money an organization should receive, how much funds and partnerships they should receive, they can use this as leverage and say, we're more than just sports. We're also a community institution. We're a pillar because we've done this. So before I leave, I want to go ahead and share this quote with you. It's by Margaret Heffernan. For good ideas and true innovation, you need human interaction, conflict, argument, and debate. She's a business professor from the UK. But she hits it right on the head when she says you need human interaction. You will have challenges along the way. You might have nothing going on. You might actually have a conflict with your own mission, for example. But it's only when you focus on the human interaction that you actually can spin off better ideas. You can come up with new innovative ideas as well. So that concludes my presentation.